Many of you already know about it, but I'd encourage you to get on the internet. There are various forums that talk about biodiesel. One of my favorites is the InfoPop forum. I've been on it now for 3 years, I guess. There's several others out there, but get involved with other people. There's people from all over the world that you become good friends with. I've got people, not China, but the UK, all over the world that I've shipped stuff to and become good friends through it. I've met many of you, including this guy, through it. So I met you here last year, I guess, but I didn't get working on that.
If you get on the InfoPop, just ignore Till. He's just an ignorant ass.
This is titled Biodiesel Quality Testing. Myself and Steve are going to be teaching this, sharing some tips and things. This morning you learned about ASTM fuels and testing. Well, all of us don't have $1,055 to send our fuel off to places like, I contracted with a lab called Fuel Only to get it tested all the time. It's $79 to see if you can pass the total and free glycerin test. And just a little diatribe, and then we don't have a whole lot to cover. We've got stuff and we'll have fun. Bob said it well. Unless you're selling your fuel, or unless you're giving it to your friends, who cares if you pass ASTM? If it'll burn in your vehicle and you're okay with the risks, great. However, as soon as you cross that threshold line and you want to put it on sale and you want to, or give it to your buddies, you take on some liability risks. Primarily, you sell it and it's not biodiesel, as according to the EPA, which is a fuel feedstock, a blending feedstock that meets ASTM D6751-7A, the federal government all of a sudden doesn't consider what you sold biodiesel. Any rules or liability things that go with that fuel just went out the window, and you basically sold them something, but it wasn't biodiesel, and you now can be in trouble. Lots and lots of nasty fines if you want to go study it. It's pretty ugly. So we're going to teach you some basic tests, though, that you can do at home, that home brewers have done for ages. So you think you got bio, do you? Well, let's find out if you do or not. That's the title of this. There's many advanced places you can learn about making biodiesel. One of them that I particularly like, I'm biased because I helped create it, I guess, but is the collaborative biodiesel tutorial. If you've not been there, I would encourage you to go there and begin reading. It's biodieselcommunity.org. On there, you're going to find advanced testing methods. You're going to find things about theory. You're going to learn a lot. Today we're going to talk about a couple tests, though. We're going to talk about water, how to test for water in feedstock, how to do a basic titration test. Most of you may or may not know. I imagine, how many of you have done a titration? Okay, we won't spend a whole lot of time on that. Methanol testing of biodiesel, which he alluded to this morning, Bob. We're going to talk about that and ways to do it, and I'm going to tell a little bit more about what's going on. I'll touch on ASTM testing, and then we'll talk a little bit about if you really want to get into that high-quality testing equipment. I've got some slides of different equipment. So, Steve, if you want to come on up, we'll kind of swap off and go through some of these. How many of you have gotten biodiesel or oil with water in it? How many of you have tried to make biodiesel with water in it? How many of you have made block?
No, that's nasty stuff.
Oh, that's okay. It's not fun, is it? Just a little bit of chemistry. Oil plus methanol plus lye equals biodiesel. Oil plus water plus lye equals soap. And unfortunately, the water likes to attack the oil quicker than the methanol and the lye. So you'll get soap quicker than you'll get biodiesel, and it'll kill a reaction faster than anything I know. In fact, I've read some things where a cup of water in 50 gallons of oil will keep you from hitting ASTM. I mean, it is that bad to the biodiesel process. So there's various ways that you can test for it. I'm going to go from the longest, or the quickest to the most expensive, if you will. The easiest one that most of you have probably done, how many of you have done a fry pan test? Okay. What that is you take a simple pan and you put some oil in it, what you think is good oil, and you put it on the stove and you watch for bubbles. That's it. You just watch for bubbles.
And keep your face out of it.
And keep your face out of it because steam's not fun, huh? And it kind of smells bad. That test works. And for most biodiesels, it works quite well. However, it's a subjective test. It's subjective to your ear, listening to the bubbles. It's subjective to your eyes, watching for the bubbles. And it's subjective to how much biodiesel or oil you've put in that pan. If you put a very small amount, you're going to get a little bit quicker bubbling action. If you don't, it may take a while, and you may have that temp up. Your thermometer's sitting on the bottom where the heat is, and you're just frying away. This is kind of an example of that. Yeah?
I just wanted to make a recommendation, something we picked up at Harbor Freight. For $40, you can get an infrared thermometer, so you can be several feet away. That's like the coolest $40 we've ever spent. We use it all.
Can you repeat it?
It's an infrared thermometer, and they're really cool.
Where do you get it?
Harbor Freight. It's like the biodiesel toy store.
Yeah.
Or eBay.
Or eBay, yeah.
$30.
One thing what I was just going to say, one thing you have to watch with them is you have to look at the accuracy of them. A lot of them, you pull out so many feet and you've lost your accuracy.
1 to 1.
Yeah, they're really, some of them are really sensitive.
And you'll also find that if the pan you use is reflective, that if it's silver or gold colored pan, you'll get a much more accurate reading than it's cast iron. It's a black pan.
There you go.
The reflective surface reads a lot more accurate.
And I would say with every test we talked about today, there's some pluses and there's some minuses to it. I'll try and touch on those and Steve will as well. You want to touch on the microwave test? Have you done that one? Or
Yeah.
you had it in your slides?
We actually don't use a scale. We just look for bubbles.
Do you?
So we'll take a 100 milliliter beaker, 50, and maybe half full of raw oil, and just nuke it for a minute, maybe a minute and a half. If it's bubbling, sputtering, and popping, we know we've got an issue. For the first couple of years, we brought in really, really great oil, and all of a sudden started running into really bad oil. You can't tell by looking. So it's probably good to get in the habit of doing these tests. It's better to find out you're going to have a problem before you have it than try to work backwards and figure out what caused the problem is.
Why did my biodiesel do this?
You know?
Well, let's see, let's back up.
I think you're a nerd. Oh.
Yeah. Okay. The microwave test is kind of a combination of a fry pan test and you need it with a scale. Essentially, the theory behind it is you take a sample of oil, you weigh it with a very accurate scale, and then you take that sample of oil and you put it in a microwave and you heat it for a period of time, preferably past the boiling point of water, take it back out of the microwave and weigh it. The difference in the weight, there's a formula on biodieselcommunity.org that will tell you what that equated to in percent of water in your oil. More than 2% of water in your oil, and 2% is not much. I mean, think about a 50-gallon tank of oil, 10% of that is 5, half of that is 2.5, so 2 gallons of water in 50 gallons. Sounds like a lot, but if it's mixed all through there,
That'd actually be 4%.
It's
4%. So 2% is even less than that.
1 gallon.
Yeah.
1 gallon per 50. That'll kill a reaction. I mean, it does. You might get something, but I don't know that it's going to be biodiesel. So anyway, that's how that test works. The next test is a test that's a little bit more accurate. The ASTM people use something called well, I guess Carl Fisher's not ASTM approved, but not yet. That's one way, but they have other ways. Another kind of quick and easy way is something that a lot of commercial producers have started using. I went to a lab down in New Mexico, or a factory, and I found this, and I'll pass it around. And it's simply a gauge, it's a pressure gauge, that's all it is, with a little vial. And inside this little vial, or thing, you put in calcium hydride. It comes with a pre-measured amount, you put it in, and then you put oil in it. Calcium hydride is an interesting chemical in that it reacts with any water in oil and produces hydrogen gas, which then will produce pressure, which then you read this pressure, compare it to a scale, and you know exactly down to 50 parts per million how much water you have in an oil. This can be both in biodiesel as well as in an oil substance itself. The test was invented by Mobil 1 for testing hydraulic fluids, water content in hydraulic fluids. If any of you run hydraulic equipment, water in the oil in the hydraulic equipment will destroy it fairly quickly. So they wanted to be very accurate, and we've adapted these tests.
So you shake it up after you put
You shake it up, yep, put it in, give it a minute, look at the gauge, and then off you go. It can read anywhere from 50 parts per million clear up to, I don't remember, but it's some you basically half your recipe and it allows you to go way up.
Now, all of these tests work for the vegetable oil feedstock and the final product.
I would say yes, but I've never, I'll be honest, I've never tried the fry pan test or the microwave test with biodiesel. Have you?
I've done it.
Have you? And it works?
Yeah, it works. I mean, especially I use it a lot after washing. You know, when the fuel is kind of cloudy and you're not sure why. You know, throw it on a pan and you know it's like, well, I think it's probably because it's not all the way dry. You throw it on the pan and it gets hot and boom, bubbles everywhere, or you know, it starts bubbling. Then you know, and then the biodiesel turns clear after that. Then you know you got to dry your fuel better. So
Perfect. So yes.
Price on your water test?
Price on the water test kit, I didn't get to set the price, unfortunately. It comes from the factory. $209 for the unit, plus 50 calcium hydride packs. And then for an additional $60, they'll ship another 50 with it. There's $35 worth of shipping, and it's not because it costs that much to ship it, it's because there's a hazmat fee. Calcium hydride is considered more toxic and dangerous than sodium hydroxide or sulfuric acid. Had I tried to get on the airplane with that, I probably would have, well, if they found it, they could arrest me. It's a very, very hazardous substance.
They throw you under the jail pipe.
Yeah, exactly. But it works really well. I shipped one overseas and it was over $300 for the shipping alone.
And one word of warning, you can overdose that. You can put too much chemical in it and have a time bomb on your hand.
So be careful.
Follow the directions. Oh, it's a great meter. It's well worth the money. I'll vouch for it. But be careful when you do it right.
You're
Don't do it when
using,
you're tired.
you're really using something that's going to produce hydrogen gas. So this is a test, these are some tests you can do for water. If you really want to be super scientific, you can go out and buy a Carl Fisher tester. What'd she say, 5,000 to 6,000 this morning? Or you can send it off to ASTM and have it tested as well, but,
What about the used car dealer for water and oil?
I've never used it, so I can't speak to it.
You're aware of it? A used car dealer where it's kind of a titration. I bought it, but haven't used it. It's
Has
a jet
anyone
water
else in the room
and
used it?
oil.
I've heard of it, but I've never used it.
What is it?
I'm sorry.
No, you're
It's a titration thing. It's for used car dealers to check water in the engine oil.
Oh, okay. I was like, used car dealer, what does that have to do with biodiesel?
They let you do that to check if the head gaskets are intact.
Okay.
Because if you've blown a head gasket, you get fluid in your oil, which means you're going to have all sorts of problems. Any comments, other things you do for water? No? Okay. This thing. Okay. There we go.
Titration, we run into people occasionally who don't titrate. They guess.
Oh, yeah.
They'll just pigeonhole it. We're going to just pretend our oil is of a certain quality and run what we think is right. But titration is so simple. Like all of you have done it. It's so quick, easy, and cheap. There's no reason not to do it. But if we're not titrating, we don't know how much catalyst it's going to take. How many in here are using sodium? And how many potassium? Okay. Because if we don't use enough catalyst, we're going to get under-reactive biodiesel. And if we use too much, we're going to get excess soap formation. So we titrate every batch. And I also very much like to keep samples of the oil from each batch around, at least until we've gotten it finished. Once again, just to kind of be able to perform a little more of a quality test. Does anybody want us to go over titration or have any questions about it? How pink is pink? Phenolphthalein?
You say better results if performed repeatedly. Does that mean on the same sample or just if you get into it and keep going?
We'd like to see the same results 3 times.
3 times.
Repeat it until you're getting a consistent result. At workshops, we'll let people doing it, or they'll put a couple extra drops of phenolphthalein, or maybe too much alcohol. Repeat that result.
I want to ask, we sell WVO to producers, and our oil generally titrates at about 3.
Using sodium or?
Well, we sell the WVO to the producers, and he uses sodium though, although he
To
just
do a
switched,
titration?
he just switched to KOH. We use sodium for our, but the other producers we sold to, I don't know what they use. But my question is, they said the last batch you sold was titrated at 4 and made terrible fuel. And I have a feeling they just don't, they maybe didn't change their formula, but what would you say is a general rule that you would shy away from?
Using oils over a certain titration?
Yeah, certain.
For potassium, we'll go up to 5 or 6 using a single stage base reaction. If we're getting things that titrate 7 and over, we're generally going to a 2-stage. We really don't mess around with oil. If we have a barrel of 10, we may blend it with some 2 to come up with something in the middle. But generally, once it gets up into that 8, 9, 10 range, it's just going to cause trouble. And we've been running into a lot of people who are trying to push that envelope, and that's where that water really starts to come into play. Because when we mix methanol with potassium or sodium hydroxide, we're getting water, chemically speaking. So any water in the oil just exacerbates that problem even further.
So you mentioned for potassium, you go up to 5 or 6. Is that different for sodium?
What did you, I'm sorry?
Same for sodium titration.
Sodium, it depends on if you're adding the base to it, but sodium is typically going to titrate lower, but 4 or 5 still is okay. I agree with him. If it titrates around 10, I like to go look elsewhere. If it titrates at 5, I'm borderline. If it titrates at 3, I get excited. If it titrates at 1, I make sure no one's around and I lock in the contract. Because that's good oil.
What about turmeric?
Works the same. I've done it.
I didn't do it less than 2 months.
Seems okay.
One of the problems that you'll run into with turmeric, let's real quickly talk about the different ways we make titration samples up here, and because it relates to turmeric as well. Go ahead and cut it open, or?
After.
Okay. Basically, you take you take a solution of alcohol and you mix in 1 gram of your catalyst that you're going to titrate with, whether that be sodium hydroxide or potassium hydroxide. Once you have that mixed in, you've got a solution which you're now trying to neutralize a fatty acid oil. And you use an indicator. We can use turmeric, we can use phenolphthalein, this is my favorite, phenol red, and phenolphthalein, phenol red, turmeric. Those are the 3 main ones that we use. The problem with turmeric, if you mix it into a solution, it can go bad after a while. In fact, there have been some people that have reported it going bad after 3 months. I mean, really fairly quick. It degrades.
There's the dry powder that comes in the container.
Dry powder should say okay if I would say if it's clean, sealed, dark place.
Actually, it's used so often in high school science classes, and science teachers tell you to mix up, if you want to use it as a solution, to mix it up every time you're going to use it.
There you go. It's so cheap.
But I don't work that way. I just put the powder in. Are you going to talk about that?
The turmeric powder? We can. I don't know if we've got turmeric here. We'll kind of walk through the
Because
basics.
I don't mean to hijack you,
No, that's fine.
but the shortcut to it, I'm a big turmeric user, and instead of, I used to mix up the indicator solution, and it was just another step, to do it periodically. I was starting to do it like once a month. So now what I do is I just take a little tiny amount of the spice itself, just put it right in the alcohol, and yeah, it'll be a little grainy, but the color will really pop. And you don't have to worry about mixing up a separate solution and metering it out. So it kind of simplifies your activity and gives you the advantage of this really cheap indicator. Well, it changed, in my case, different turmerics have different amounts of the chemical that actually causes the indication. And in my case, it starts out being yellow when it's acid and turns a kind of a rose color when it's neutralized. But I have seen pictures on the internet where it's like magenta. And so don't worry about what that color is exactly, just worry about, did you see the color change and did you maintain it for 20 or so seconds?
It changes to each change.
Yeah. And let it change to be intense, too.
With phenolphthalein, you're seeing it change at about, what, 8.3?
I think it's 8.2 is what I've read.
And with turmeric, I use turmeric also. I used to use phenolphthalein, but in Canada, it's like getting rocket engines. It's almost impossible to get. And it titrates at, or it indicates at about 8.5 or 8.6, which is closer to the ideal. So,
Which means you'll actually get a little bit more better reactive. You may make a little bit more soap, but you get better reactive fuel.
right.
You know what really
If whatever indicator indicates later, you're going to be adding more, which in turn you're going to get better reactions. You're going to get better however, you'll get more soap along with it. Yeah.
The guy from Canada's hidden behind the pillar to make sure he knows we ship to Canada.
Oh, he sells titration kits, getting ready to as well. So.
We have phenolphthalein up there on his website. We ship to Canada. In fact, I just shipped some before I left to Montreal.
So I know it's interesting to get stuff up there. It's expensive.
It is. Turmeric is cheaper and it's less toxic, blah, blah, blah.
Phenol red also, before we climb into that, phenol red also indicates a different area too, and that's important to know. I'll be honest though, for home brewers, as long as you get somewhere within a range, as long as you get a good reaction, as long as your 327 passes, who cares?
I think our change point is 8.5.
For which one?
The change point
On phenol red?
on phenolphthalein.
Yes.
I was in a lab and we were doing titration of phenolphthalein, and we were also checking on the pH meter just to compare. And we were getting the phenolphthalein changing color when the pH meter read at 11.
I would throw the pH meter out the window.
Right, the pH meter is wrong.
It was calibrated.
I don't
and
care.
It doesn't.
A pH meter reads pH. Oil has no pH. Only water has pH.
If you got water, you got a problem.
Yeah, I hated, when I first got into biodiesel, I bought a pH meter and I tried it. Excuse the French, but the damn thing was so off the chart, and I'd calibrate it and get it right. And as soon as you go to an indicator solution that you put in it that dissolves, you get such better results that I threw mine away. I don't know.
I think the other thing about pH meters is to get one that's really good is hundreds of dollars. You know, if you get the ones that are like $20, like the student ones, you know, I just don't. They're not that accurate anyway, even in water.
I actually had to do analytical chemistry using a pH meter. They work out of ions. Oils are non-ionic. You're not measuring the same thing, so don't. I agree with you. They're completely not applicable for this use.
Get rid of them if you got them. I mean, they're nice to show people, but
they're really cool if you want to do water chemistry. They're awesome.
Yeah.
They're just terrible for water chemistry.
I just wanted to say, to share that on my list, my local list for my biodiesel club, Bill the chemist, who is Bill Klockferstein, who is actually a lipids chemist that still gets quoted in people's papers, is a member, and he told us don't get hung up on that little difference between the pH windows of the different indicators, because, and this is going to sound like an insult, and he didn't mean it that way, but what he was saying was the way we titrate is so inaccurate to an analytical chemist that it makes our concern over, is it 8.5? Is it 8.3? That's like a joke. So don't worry about it. Just don't worry about it. The key to titration, in my opinion, is to develop your personal accuracy so that you do the same every time. And that way you know what you're doing.
Yeah, I'd just like to comment too. Another thing to keep in mind, all you're doing with the titration is trying to get an idea of the free fatty acid content and still have enough catalyst left over to catalyze a reaction. But the art of how much catalyst to use is very subjective too, because it's a catalyst. You know, the more you use, the more water you create along with your methanol. So you're going to produce some soaps. You're going to produce free fatty acids and then soaps in your reaction. The less you use, you know, the harder it is to get a good reaction. So there's kind of a wide range of opinions on how much catalyst to use, even if you're using just new oil with little to no free fatty acids. So and it's kind of my opinion, is a bit of a subjective thing, because, you know, if you have oil that titrates really high, then, you know, you don't want to just dump tons of catalyst in it because you're going to get a lot of soap. But if you have oil that titrates really low, because if it's very free water and there's no free fatty acids to begin with, you could actually way overload it on catalyst relative to how much free fatty acid is, because there's so much less likely to produce soap with really good oil. So it's kind of a, I guess, an experience thing, really, but it's not an exact science, you know, when dealing with catalyst.
Our base titration amount, we started off at 5.6 grams of potassium per liter plus titration, but after sending samples off to Bob, they were coming back slightly underconverted. We bumped up to 7, kept testing, now we bumped up to 9 grams per liter. So we're changing our base titration rate. We're certainly not going to be off by 2 whole points here, so you're right.
It's kind of like, you know, in Bob's plant, they use way more catalyst than most homebrewers do, because they had an obligation to meet the spec. And they were kind of sacrificing some yield to do that because they were getting more soap production, but the fuel they made was meeting spec. So if you're making your own fuel, you kind of have to decide, well, do I really want to make sure I meet spec and lose all this yield and have to wash it 8 times? Or, you know, is it okay if I'm close to spec, but I'm getting, you know, the maximum yield? And that's just a personal choice.
Let's talk about a titration kit and what good things to have in it are, though, because I think it's important. I think it's also important to talk a little bit about safety, too. I kind of deem it necessary, if you're going to play with biodiesel and really want to understand it, you really ought to have a good titration kit. There's a million different things you can buy out there. There's a lot of vendors, like I list up here. I think this looks like this Rick's or yours, or one. He sells one, I sell one. You can get them all over the place. But let's talk about some basic things that should be in it. Go ahead.
I bought a kit, and I don't know what it's called, but it's the best piece of equipment we've got, and it's the squeeze ball. The bottle on the bottom, you squeeze it, it goes up to 10 mil, and you can drop it off.
Self-zeroing Brae.
Yeah, it was like $50, and we are in love with it. It's just wonderful. Because you can leave it when you're done, and you get your flash of color. You can set it aside, get clean up, and then look at the indicator and know exactly where you're at. You're not, was that 7 this time, or was it 8.2? It's great.
Do you leave your solution in it all the time, or do you clean it out after?
No, we usually leave our solution in, but when we do our next titration, like we're doing titrations twice a day, we'll shake it and squeeze it and drain it and squeeze it to make sure, because it almost looks like water condensates in the glass, to make sure it mixes back up into the liquid. Sure.
What's in your basic?
We of course have instructions that just tells you how to remix if you need some more potassium water, how to do that yourself, and the procedures. And then we also have pictures just to make it a little easier. But we have a couple of glass beakers, a 10 or 12 cc syringe, 3 because I don't like the ones very much, a little stir rod, and a little pipette to take samples. And some phenolphthalein, and some glasses. In the master kit, there's gloves also.
It's important that you wear gloves when you're doing titrations. A lot of us don't, but you really are kind of dealing with some chemicals. So, also, if you're playing with potassium hydroxide in particular, put these on when you're taking potassium hydroxide out of your bucket and when you're moving it around, because little tiny specks can go airborne very easily. I actually didn't know this occurred until afterwards. I had moved a 50-pound bag of potassium hydroxide with gloves on and everything into a bucket. And a speck, like a dust particle, hit this eye. And I had a bloodshot eye that went bloodshot from here to about here for about 3 weeks. So even when you're being careful, I had moved my glasses up on my head just to look at something. Didn't move things around, but there was enough dust in the air that I caught one. So please wear safety glasses.
Another thing is a respirator or a dust mask helps if you're dealing with mad quantities, because most people say, oh yeah, respirators don't do anything for biodiesel because they're only talking about the methanol fumes, which they don't. But when you're you're dealing with a 50-pound bag of KOH, the dust, you can breathe that in, and a respirator will block that pretty good.
We have a fume hood. If you have a university surplus in your town, they're virtually free. It's a neat little addition to the shop if you can snag one.
Snake one.
A fume hood.
Oh.
Just a comment, you have to be careful when you're wearing gloves that you don't wipe your breath.
Yes. Yes, that's very important.
So you kind of learn how to.
You got to learn how to do it like this.
That'll get you.
Yeah. So, a couple of beakers, a couple syringes, stuff to make it up with. Again, various vendors. I carry tiny little syringes, I carry little cups, what have you. You basically just need the stuff to prepare a solution that you're going to test against your oil and an indicator solution, and some way to transfer this very gently, tiny tiny bits of it at a time. Oh, thank you. Okay. Leave it alone. So that's titration. Again, the more times you do it, the easier it'll become. Do multiple times.
I'm not sure if you mentioned it, but we also got a small scale that does up to 50 grams, a digital scale. And it takes the guessing game out of what is 1 gram.
Oh, what is 1 gram? It's important that you weigh it right. Very important. Exactly. It's a great point. If you don't have a scale, they're cheap. You can walk into Harbor Freight now, and I think $19.95 you can get a little tiny pocket scale. If you want to spend some more, there are vendors out there that carry a little bit nicer scales. That's titration. Methanol test. This is the one we saw this morning, and I just wanted to go over it a little bit. This test, as you saw, for those that, well, hopefully all of you were there, unless you slept through it. This test allows us to test for conversion rates in biodiesel. Now, it's not a perfect test, as you saw today, but it's a pretty darn good one. It's as simple as taking a syringe, and I recommend that you use different syringes for the different things. If you notice today, he was only using a pipetter for the oil. And he used something different to suck in his methanol. He had it all prepped. But basically, I sell these cool little things. They have oil and methanol inside of the oil on them. You basically suck up some oil. Ooh, we could do that. You got your biodiesel ready? Want to do it? Okay. Let's do one.
No. They'll be removed for demonstration purposes.
He said that triglycerides drop out.
Triglycerides do.
What about the diglycerides and monos?
Di and monos are still kind of up in the air as to whether they do or don't drop out. They think that dyes kind of do, but that's why he's doing those tests with GCs. Now, if there's a lot of dyes, I would suggest that they do kind of drop out into solution, and we think that might be what's that haziness. However, if we pass ASTM, we don't care.
So a pass isn't necessarily a pass, but a fail is definitely a fail. More manually.
Don't you want the yellow bottle?
Oh, is this ISO? Oh, that's right. Can't do it. Never mind.
Is it what methanol like with it?
I don't know. He never got it. Did he take it? Yeah. You want to see it? Let me explain the basic chemistry of it, though. Basically, you take 3 milliliters of oil in another syringe, separate. You take 27 milliliters of methanol in a separate syringe.
You're not talking about oil, you're talking about
Biodiesel. Converted biodiesel. Yep. And I these are little teeny cool graduated cylinders. This has a 30 millimeter mark on it. So I'll squirt in 27 milliliters of methanol first, which we'll do if we get some. And then I squirt in 3 mils of biodiesel. And if you want a really good instruction on how to use syringes correctly, go to murphysmachines.com and click on his resources guide. There are right and wrong ways to use syringes, and this test is incredibly sensitive to accurately putting in the methanol and the biodiesel. There's a guy named Andrew Morris that's done a lot of studies with it, and that's what he's finding is a little bit off, you can it'll read wrong.
What is Murphy's machine?
murphysmachines.com.
Like just.
Murphy's plural, MURPHYS machines.com. And you go to his resource below. You go to his resources. I think it's got a how-to tab. But he also, by the way, for those of you that are looking for methanol and chemicals, he has a lister of all of you and all of the community submits to him anywhere they find methanol and chemicals and stuff. He lists it for us. So you can click on any state in the union. He's got Canada, he's got Hawaii, he's got all these places. And he lists it. Ooh, found some.
Those are $9.
Oh, this is 9, whatever, 9. Let's see 27.3, because I've got a few of them there. Do as I say, not as I do. Yeah, you like my invisible gloves?
How critical is it to have actually 27 mils in there of methanol as opposed to 30?
Everything I read says it's got to be darn as accurate as you can get it. I mean, you're trying to find 0.24, a quarter of 1%. So as accurate as you can get it. Did you say?
Yeah, that's something I've read.
So what they say is you make a little bubble, bring this up, and I'm trying to just get that as close as I can get it. 10.
You said you make a bubble.
You draw on here.
Yeah, you draw a little tiny air pocket first.
Why?
Because you don't want to read on the syringe, because that's wrong. You actually want to read the fluid.
Okay, so you need a bubble big enough to cover the width or the diameter?
Mm-hmm.
Just pull a plunger up to 16th of an inch. You
So-
have plenty of capacity at the top.
I don't know if you can see that, but there's a little bubble above my plunger and the mark. You can read the syringe more accurately if you're reading the fluid, not the syringe mark. Make sense?
Yeah.
It's just the little bit shape of fluid.
Mm-hmm.
That's what they're only making all the
I believe so.
It doesn't really matter as long as it's the same spotting and it's
So he's emptying it all the way.
what I would do is I would go.
Do like 40 and just go to 10.
Okay, so there's 27. I like these because they got caps to keep them clean. And they're cheap.
Go ahead, I'm nervous.
Oh.
We didn't test this oil.
This was, if it passes, it was made by him. If it fails, it was made by some guy with a fuel meister that doesn't know how to make biodiesel.
My 7-year-old's getting good at it, but.
Okay, so 3. In we go. Close it up. Funny story about these little things. These are urine samplers. They're meant to travel clear across the country without leaking. So that's why I like them. So we're just a little cloudy, but let's let it sit for a minute and see if it clears up. Sometimes it clears up.
How much do you recommend shaking? I see you gave it 2 little things. I just shake that crap out.
Based on what Andrew said, I mean, what he's doing today is all you really need. I do shake the crud out of mine, but it takes forever to settle up.
Yeah. I've been really shaking it out, but I can see how you wouldn't necessarily need to or want to.
Whatever Bob did is what I'm going to do from now on, because I trust his chemistry knowledge more than mine. Rachel, what do? You
He does it 1 time.
You shake it a lot? You just...
We only do it a little bit.
clearing up. I don't know if you can see it, but that's clearing up. Now, we're not quite crystal clear yet, but...
Are you getting any settling in it though?
See, I thought you said earlier, or you said this morning that it was an immediate result.
Well, I shook mine a little bit, remember? He's not usually pulling here.
There are some homes that doesn't open more than
Okay, we'll try some of that. This I'm seeing just a hair of dropout around the bottom.
The thing about that is if you see anything at all, then you possibly have incomplete conversion, right?
Yeah.
Because we're trying to get to this 0.5.
Now, to get more complete conversion, do you add more caustic, or do you lengthen the time that you let it stay in the process?
Well, there's a series of things. Was your oil wet? Is your lye clean and dry? You go through a process of elimination, but realistically, you add a little bit more lye to get a little bit more.
So you do this immediately after draining your glycerol, before you've done any washing, you test your...
I do it both. I do a test before I wash it, and I do a test after I wash it.
Once at a time, right after, before you've done any washing, then you can put another couple of liters of methanol with some more lye in it, and
you could, but that's another, what, 10 to 12 hours you gotta wait. But yeah, you can do
well,
it.
otherwise you've got a batch that may or may not be usable.
If it really drops out, yeah, I would do it. If I'm getting that, I'd burn that.
Yeah, right now, so you do a test before you wash and after you wash. Have you ever passed before and failed after?
No, but I have flunked before and passed after.
Okay.
What about you?
Usually pass. I don't really test it before I wash it.
Okay. What?
We always do it before, and I've actually never done it after, because I figure if I pass before I wash, I'm good.
I like to do it both, just Rachel.
I mean, if you want to test we test fuel both after the reaction. This is on both scales, off and afterwards, and then afterwards, because you want to know that, like, well, what if you're in process, your after reaction test, you know, it's just a fail.
Yeah. What if you got oil in your wash vessel?
Right.
Or what if there's crap in your wash water?
Yeah. I'd be a little bit concerned about doing it before the wash, because the soda acting as a surfactant can actually help the triglycerides stay in.
I just do it. I don't know. I've got new equipment that I'm testing all the time, and I like to test everything I do, and so I just...
Well, our logic for doing it before the wash is, if we don't have a complete reaction, then we can reprocess.
But you know what, though? He's got a really good point. If you don't see much dropout, though, it could be because the soap is suspending the oil and not letting it drop out. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not an expert at this test, but I would really caution against the validity of any results you do before you wash, because you have residual catalyst, you have methanol, you have free glycerol, and you probably have soap in unwashed fuel. And all of those things kind of, some of them are polar, some of them are non-polar, and some of them are kind of both polar and non-polar. So they all act as co-solvents for each other. So I would say that if, you know, since it's quick and easy, if you do the test before you wash and you get some kind of dropout, you know, even that, you know, it could be glycerol, you know, it could be something else. But if you don't see anything, I would not necessarily, I wouldn't expect that to mean that you have a complete reaction, because I think there could be, because of the soap and the glycerol co-solvent effect. Plus that's going to influence the 27:3 ratio, because you have residual methanol in unwashed fuel. So if that needs to be very accurate, then you can't do that with unwashed fuel.
Yes, what have we got? Oil inside, so that's your alcohol.
Let's talk a little bit about the chemistry of what's going on, too. First of all, Andrew Morris, who's done a lot of research on this, he was here last year, saw it, and really wanted to do some things. He found, through Bob and through Rick, that about 68 degrees Fahrenheit, I forgot to put my F there, is about the temperature you want to do it at if you want to be calibrated with a gas chromatograph like Bob showed us. Now I have to caveat that with, if you've got 98% humidity, water can affect it because methanol can absorb water. But that, if you want to be somewhere in the ballpark, 68 degrees, and then you look for dropouts. So we put it in, shake it. This is a really good sample of bad stuff falling out. See how bad that, this is before though. This is what ours is looking like right now. But if you get immediate dropout, you know you've got something going on. If you don't get much, and I really don't see much in that. And that looks like good fuel.
A lot of times you can tell when you drop the biodiesel in because just when you drop it in, it'll just go to the bottom and sit there rather than just hit this and right away and you go out. And then you pretty much know if you shake it that this ain't gonna work.
Yeah. Yeah. So we're about to find out on this other, this is unwashed?
Yeah. How good it turned out?
No, he drilled it down with Brae. He can wash it and leave the glycerin in the bottom. He's that good.
Oh wow. That's even better. Look at that. I don't see any got that thing nice and clean.
So you're saying the unwashed came out cleaner than the...
Well, this is different batches.
This is different. Right. Okay. Every batch is different.
Every batch is different.
Hi, I asked this to you before, but I thought I'd ask it again so
You bet.
everybody can hear it. When we do the 27-3 test, we get a cloudy result. We don't always get the oil dropout, but on a couple of batches, we get the entire thing is cloudy.
Like this one we had, or a little bit more cloudy?
Much cloudy. So I know that it's an indication of a problem, or I think
Yes.
it is, but I don't know what that problem is.
And Bob didn't even know what that problem is. He suspects it could be water, it could be oil, it could be triglycerides. That's what I suggest.
If it were oil, it would settle out.
If it were oil, it would drop to the bottom.
So it's something else contaminated.
Yeah.
We've done this test and sent the samples off to Bob, and we got cloudiness. It was fairly cloudy, and we had some pinheads, but we were really shaking it up, and it took them probably 15 minutes or 20 minutes or more to settle out.
Yeah.
And we sent them off to him, and he did the test and said, that's too cloudy. You could tell it probably wasn't going to pass. And it came back at about 99.4% conversion. So that's with not BBs, but pinheads.
About 0.60 total.
Yeah. So not
And a
bad.
cloudy result throughout. With the,
Yeah. Well, the question for us was, is that acceptable? What are we burning it in? Do we want to bump up our catalyst? What are we going to do about it? These are just to help kind of provide a measuring stick as to where you are and the kind of results you're having.
I would say that don't trust this test if you're going to sell it. This is a really good test for a firewall test, but this is not a substitute for a totally free glycerin test. Yes?
Just want to make sure that 94% would run in most vehicles.
No, he said 99.4, which
Yeah.
is 0.6%. Yeah.
It'll still run everything but probably the new common or like 016.
I'd stick it in a Duramax. I wouldn't have a problem with it.
Yeah, we think it's fairly inconsequential, but once again, now we played around with liability waiver originally. We want to have to go out and members sign something saying they understand this is experimental fuel and it's at their own risk. We didn't really go through with that, but it's we do have one member who has an 06 Passat automatic, and on Glenn's older E50, he had a weird transmission issue.
I think that's actual transmission problem. A friend of mine had a 05, same issue, 05.
It wasn't really hunting, it was just
Hesitate.
downshift for, it wasn't looking for another gear. It was just a real weird, we haven't noticed it in anything else, but if we're looking at everything, that's the
You
one.
might tell him to just get his transmission fluid changed. That's usually the biggest problem.
You know, this brings up a really good point. A lot of times people say, well, I've made biodiesel and I sold it to my friends and it did something to their engine. I venture to say that diesel engines aren't perfect either. And if you look on the forums and look at different things, I mean, Ford's got their share of problems, Chevy has their share of problems, Dodge has their share of problems all over. Dodge has probably got the least with biodiesel. So don't immediately assume it's the fuel. Do a process of elimination to narrow out whether it was the fuel. And the tests we're showing you here today allow you to do that.
Another thing, I mean, I would comment on, based on my knowledge of diesel engines, I would be, if you're going to get really anal about testing, I would be much more concerned about water in the fuel than a little bit of unreacted oils. Because I think that you know, that's gonna, the unreactivated oil is gonna have, maybe have a higher viscosity or something, but water can really cause problems in your engine. So I don't know if you guys are gonna cover that.
Couple water.
Yeah.
Plus, a good percentage of when you do tests on actual biodiesel, you'll be surprised how often petroleum diesel does not meet its specification at
That's what they filter.
Well, and even biodiesel, 51% of commercial samples tested in the last quarter were out of specification. A full 30% were under-converted. They were never inspected to begin with. This is commercial biodiesel. So you have to kind of weigh everything out.
I have a hard time getting really overly concerned about this test not passing or not passing. So because I know that biodiesel or diesel engine will run on waste vegetable, on straight oil.
Yeah.
I mean,
You're right.
putting some, or and a lot of them will mix diesel and vegetable oil together in a single tank system.
However, that's, for those of us that are biodiesel geeks, we like to push our reactions as far as we can.
Not only that, but that one day if you go drive around at 32 degrees.
You know, that's a really good point, and I want to talk about it too. But go ahead.
Real quick, just another thing to consider, diesel engines will run on a lot of things for varying periods of time. You can put really crappy fuel and get 100 miles out of your engine, or you can run really good fuel and get 200,000 miles out of your engine, and anything in between. So just because it starts and runs and you've gone, you know, a couple road trips on it, doesn't necessarily mean it's not causing long-term damage to your engine. So
hopefully some of you got to go to the diesel mechanics presentation a couple days yesterday. They showed injectors and what coking is and all of that, and it won't kill an engine, but it'll keep it from running at peak efficiency. I think my Isuzu, while it loves biodiesel, had a couple of bad batches, and I smoke a little more than I do, and I've got to get in there and clean my injectors up now. It's my own fault because I've got crappy fuel. But what did you say a minute ago?
At 35 degrees
Thank you.
Fahrenheit, that's the day
There we go.
of oil not using biodiesel.
Let me tell you where the 0.24% came from. And Bob didn't get enough time this morning to go into it. At 0.24% total glycerin, they've evaluated that something like 90% of biodiesel made with 0.24% or lower isn't going to have the gelling issues that, as it gets cold, like the rest of the fuel would. So if you're 0.249 or above, the propensity for it to gel as it gets cooler quickly occurs more frequently. I don't know if I said that or if you understood what I meant, but basically, the more triglycerides you've got in there, the higher the propensity for it to gel quicker as it cools.
And also, you multiply that little vial up to a 50-gallon or 20-gallon tank, that all sinks to the bottom, you're going to start your engine out. You're going to be running cold vegetable oil. It's a large percentage.
Yep. I don't have it in my slides, but I want to touch on the FLIP test. The FLIP test is put out by a group in, it's actually Randall Vaughn. Some of you have had a chance to meet him. He wanted a firewall test as well to test fuel for various things. It's been shown, and I've got some samples down here, that biodiesel may pass a 327 test, but may not necessarily pass a FLIP test. It's also been shown, and I've seen, where you can pass a FLIP test and flunk a 327 test. And that's because this test measures different things. This measures for monoglyceride, this measures for water, so it says. And it measures other things that this test doesn't measure. Boy, look how clear that is. That is just crystal clear, that's good fuel. Water test, where's the water tester? It's around here somewhere. Measures a different thing than these. And so, while we may want to say, oh, well, I use this test and it's the only test I use, I would recommend that if you're really going to be thorough about your testing, that you test for several things and that you have a good testing regimen. Testing for water, we've talked about 3 different ways to test it. Testing for reaction, we've talked about the 327 test. using this test to test for monoglycerides. It also tests for additional contaminants. It tests for several things. However, someone pointed out last year that Randall's test sometimes is a little bit more picky than even the ASTM test. And what was it? You weren't here last year, but they said that Randall's test is, I forget the quote, but it was beautiful. Something about marine biodiesel, and sometimes his biodiesel will pass ASTM isn't good enough for him when he puts it in his boat.
All those samples you have up there of the FLIP test are ASTM certified fuel, except for the one that passed.
How about that?
Yeah.
So see? So FLIP's good. And I'll give you my beef with the FLIP test. I think it's a wonderful test. I just don't think there's any good interpretative material out there for it. It gives you this tiny little thing, and it's why I wouldn't sell it, because I didn't want to deal with the phone calls from people saying, well, it's kind of this color. Because as I talked with Rick, that's why he's quit selling it, quite honestly, is Randall has just not published good interpretative data for knowing what it is. Those of you who have played with this test, I think there's a lot of gray area that we don't understand. Apparently it's been tested with GCs and stuff, but it's just not been published. Is that a fair statement about it? Or?
I'm not sure so much on the GC correlation with it. It is very subjective. I mean, it's, you know, like, I didn't really talk about it, but like the soap test is very subjective in terms of like your personal vision. Some people might see an orange as a different orange. And if you say, what kind of orange is that? What kind of purple is that? So that can be a hard thing to indicate.
So for those who don't know what FLIP test is.
Oh, sorry. FLIP test is just I don't have a good picture of it, but it's just a test. You can buy it from Piedmont. They sell it. I don't know of anyone else that sells it anymore because Rick quit selling it because he got tired of it.
We have a bunch of them right
Yeah. we got, I talk with Rick, he's my competitor. He runs V100 Supply almost on a daily basis. That sounds weird for a competitor to talk that much, but we do. And we've talked it's just a test. You can pay about $49. It comes with I think it comes with 10 vials and instructions on how to run it. Bob had a picture of it on his slides.
It also comes with a reference sample.
Yes, it comes with a reference sample.
I think it might be rubbed
There it
off.
is.
But it also, the company is called Cytoculture. So
Yeah.
if you go to cytoculture.com, there's a PDF that Randall just wrote in the last few months.
Good.
It has tons and tons of really clear pictures of what to look for.
It's about time.
It still doesn't make it easy, though.
Really?
It still doesn't.
Cytoculture is spelled CYTOCULTURE.com. Cytoculture.com. So that's the FLIP test. So, now let's talk about some of the other things. Now we get down to the golden standards. Okay, you've tested your fuel, it passes everything, but if you're a real techno geek and biodiesel geek and you want to know just how well your fuel really does, the golden standard for testing fuel in the commercial industry, which we claim the commercial industry is the one to do, is ASTM testing. There are several labs all over the country. What you basically do is they will send you a kit. This is from a company called Fuel Only. They typically will send you out a bottle to put your sample in, which goes in another bottle, which then you seal, which then you wrap some absorbent around, which then you put in a plastic bag, which then you put in a box, which then you also put packing material around it, and you send it off to them. And when it gets there, this is all the packing material that comes with this thing, and there's a lot, but they don't want it to leak. They test it, and after they tested it on the equipment that Rachel so eloquently told us about this morning, they send you back results, and you can use those results to certify. Well, I guess you really don't certify yourself, but you can prove that you can make good fuel, and you can make fuel that meets the ASTM standard. There are several tests within that ASTM standard. Tests for total and free glycerin, $79.95 if you use me. You can get it all over the place. What I would encourage you to do if you do get a total and free glycerin test, get one that breaks out the triglycerides, monoglycerides, and diglycerides, not just your total and free, because that really doesn't tell you, in my opinion, that doesn't tell you much. The reason you want to to spend that 80 bucks is to identify how many monoglycerides are still there, how many diglycerides are still there, how many triglycerides. Bob didn't go into it, but last year he talked quite a bit. I've got a little bit of time, so I will. If the ratio of monoglycerides to diglycerides is higher than triglycerides, then you're getting better reactive fuel. Remember his graphs today, and you push it this way, you get better reactive fuel, push it that way. At the tail end this way, you get more triglycerides. You want fuel that has more esters, monoglycerides, and diglycerides than it has triglycerides. And having the test results come back with those broken out will tell you what's going on in your biodiesel reactions. So then that money that you spend is really meaningful. When you call labs, there's two ways they'll do a total and free glycerin test. $120 at Magellan gets you the full-blown one. I called them the other day. And I think 80 is what their total and free is, and all you get is a thing that just says, here's what your total and free was. Does that sound right?
What would you...
I mean, I think that maybe Deanna's changed it, but they should send you a chronogram if you ask.
Yeah, if you ask. Most people don't know how to interpret it, so they won't do that.
Do you have any ideas or comments, like, say you have very little tris and dis, but it's all monos, or it's kind of a fair balance of all three, and that might be why you're not passing, or what your total numbers are? Like, do you have any ideas about what kind of feedback that would give you about what you're doing wrong? Like, should you mix longer? Should you do it hotter? Should you use more catalyst? Like, if you're having, like, if you don't pass, and it's because of this or that ratio, like, how would that give you feedback on how you should adjust the process? Do you have any ideas on that?
I don't have the good data that Bob does, and if you want to ask, he knows the exact ratios because he's taken samples of it, but I'll tell you what I think. If your total glycerin, if 80% of that, if 70% of that total glycerin was in your triglycerides, and then you've got 20% in your di and 10% in your mono, so 7, 8, 9, 10, that's 100%, then you aren't reacting, you're not giving it even enough catalyst. Or there's water.
Yeah.
Water or catalyst, and those two things are such a killer. Water's so bad. And so go back and try and add a little bit more catalyst, and if you still come back and it still has that ratio, then you know you've got other problems, such as water in your oil.
Is that something that's commonly seen? Like a lot of tris?
I see water in the oil all the time.
No, but I mean like a lot of tris, but not a lot of monos. I've never seen that on a chromatograph. Usually monos are like...
The chromatograms that he had today, I don't know if you remember, he called it that big hump.
Yeah.
That's what that indicated. Because those humps were triglycerides. And then his dyes were here, and his monos were here, and his esters were here.
Yeah,
a big hump. That means you've got a lot of unreacted oil.
The chromatograms that have a lot of unreacted, it's like people that aren't pushing the reaction to completion, where they either are skimping on the alcohol or the catalyst, or heat or reaction time. Those four parameters, I see a increasing from monos, dyes, and tris. Like, you've got monos like you would see in inspect fuel, where they might be sweet right on that quarter, but your dyes are increasing and then your tris. That's just...
So I guess a good kind of cheesy way to say it is if the slope between your monos and your tris is like that, then you know you've got a reaction problem.
Mm-hmm.
Either too less, and really it won't tell you what it was.
Yeah.
It's either too less methanol, too less catalyst, there's water in the oil you didn't mix long enough, and then you just eliminate one of those things and move on. However, that's why I would use personally the 327 test and hit that before you send it off to the lab.
Do you subscribe to the theory that it's some of the monos come out in the washing process because they're a little bit more soluble in water than...
My jury's out on that.
Yeah.
I did some work with hydrogenated oil. It was real hard to react. My theory was just because there was lack of double bonds, and so it was hard to get the break those off. And the monos, that's when I was getting that weird sludge, like monos and dyes, like right in water biodiesel interface.
Yeah.
Tested on GC or anything.
Yeah, I mean, the idea that I've heard is that, I mean, and you could see with the 327 test, they're saying, oh, we're seeing, well, monos and dyes are kind of soluble in methanol. Well, there's methanol in unwashed fuel, so I've heard the theory that, you know, if you have a lot of monos and dyes, you know, some of that will come out in the wash process because it'll come out with the alcohol and glycerin.
Especially seeing the late washes after methanol already all come out.
Yeah.
And using the stovepipe, I would just let that stuff go out in the water. But it tries, I would assume that probably still.
I'll tell you the two schools of thought that I've heard. The one school of thought is that a monoglyceride is kind of polar and kind of isn't, and it likes to latch onto the biodiesel and it likes to latch onto the soap, and so it can go either way, and so it's kind of, it'll go with the water. But then I've also heard that no, it's not going to come out in the water, and so
yeah, I know I've heard, you know, that's what's correct, because I've heard both theories. But mono and diglycerides are used to make candy and all sorts of things because they're emulsifying agents that are edible, you know, so they definitely have those properties.
I don't know. My jury's still out on that. Let's talk about high quality testing equipment. I've got some pictures of it. You showed a lot more pictures than I have this morning. If you want a fairly inexpensive gas chromatograph machine, there's a company that built them specifically for biodiesel. They're available at B100 Supply. It's still not cheap. $77.95 is what I looked at last night on his price. Then you got to get the hexane. Then you got to get all these additional things that go with it. But gosh, it's great to have those gas chromatographs and the stuff that go with it. So this is what a gas chromatograph looks like. There's also a product on the market called Safe Test.
We have it. I use it. I didn't get a chance to talk about it.
You want to comment a bit about it? I'll tell you one thing. Customer service from the company I'm not impressed with. But the machine's cool.
NP Biomedicals is kind of tough, and I wish I had the data from it because I just participated in a safe test to GC correlation with our fuel and 5 other commercial producers testing their final product and safe test method, and then comparing those same things, running the same exact sample in GC. And it was pretty amazing. My test specifically was probably, if something came out to be 0.23 on the GC, it might have read like 0.20 on a safe test. Sometimes there's a slight variation lower up, higher up. We use it as kind of like
an advanced firewall test.
It's a firewall test in our process in terms of we do an extensive lab wash after the batch has been settling. I lab wash it significantly, and then if it's like 0.16 or 0.15, we'll let it go. Because generally, like actually, when I did the correlation on our fuel, it was right on, like the GC was 0.15 and safe. So we use it as a firewall test. The downside, I would have to say, is that the reagent, the enzymatic reagent that they use is extremely overpriced. And I think that's where they're making all of their money. Is they've got this proprietary enzyme that you add that reacts with the biodiesel to give the spectrophotometer like the glycerin level. But they use these in food science labs all over. It's not just a biodiesel piece of equipment.
I know what it breaks down to, cost per test.
I do about $5 or $7 per test.
Yep. By the way, how it works and why people like it. A gas chromatograph to do. First of all, you have to turn the thing on and wait for it to get warm. Then you have to calibrate it. Then you have to have all this extra equipment that goes with it. And then if it's feeling like it's kind of in a bad mood, like she talked about, it may not work. But it's the gold standard that we all use because you can get all this wonderful information out of it. The safe test is a test that you simply pull a sample of biodiesel, just like the 327, put it in a vial, take a sample reagent, put it in the vial, and then there's also a solvent, and then you put it in this thing and you literally hold it there, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, pull it out, and it spits out your glycerin level. on a piece of paper that you don't have to interpret. The gas chromatograph, remember, you've got to interpret those peaks, lump them together and say, okay, I think this is tri, di, and mono. And so it's a very quick test. Within 5 minutes, you know what your total glycerin is. It's not cheap. It's, I think, this $7,500 to get you started. And then, as she said, the reagent stuff for it is a little bit more expensive as well. But it is an option. Have you seen them before?
Yeah, for national.
I carry them as well. I sell them. I've just not been too impressed with the customer service though. But the equipment's good.
Do you talk to Dwayne?
I'll talk about Dwayne afterwards. But yeah, a bunch of resources for you for testing. How many of you have B100 Supplies Brewer's Guide? Get it.
Is that the green one?
No. The green one is the one by Girlmark, which is also a good guide. But this one is from Girlmark, or not, it's from Rick. It looks like this. Oh, mine's got a bunch of crud on the front of it. It is really, really good. I'll pass it around. There's a whole section in the back on testing. He wrote it specifically for home brewers. It talks about production. He's got safety things in here. He's got the ASTM testing things in here. I'll go ahead and let you pass that around. I think it's $20. That's $20 you'll spend to get a good manual on how to make biodiesel. The editor is sitting in the room. If they want to make themselves known, they can. Mod edited it. It's a good book. I love it. Collaborative Tutorial is another source for information on testing. The InfoPop Biodiesel Forum is incredible if you can get through some of the clutter that's there. That's this address here. The Biodiesel Basics Forum is a great place if you want to ask any kind of question and not be heckled and harassed from people that think you're asking stupid questions, which happens here sometimes. It's also available here. I also have these on my website. I think we've also got them listed on the Collaborative Biodiesel website. I think you've got some of them listed on yours. But that's some basics about testing. I just can't stress enough the importance of testing your fuel. If you really want to find out what you're doing, I've had people call me on the phone, and all of us that are in this have them call us, and they've not tested for water, they've not done a titration, they haven't got their heat high enough, and they want to know why their vehicle isn't running. Well, there's a lot of reasons. Doing some simple testing can really keep you happy with biodiesel a lot longer. Final comment from you?
One thing I would like to pass on also is trust your senses. Oftentimes when we are having issues and we're having bad batches and we start trying to trace back what it was caused by, it's not that our titration was off or our base rate was off. It's something like there was water in the oil, or say somebody mixed up some potassium water and their scale was set to ounces rather than grams. It may be something simple that you're not even thinking about. So really trust your senses. Take a look at these things, because oftentimes the solution is really right in front of you. You just need to pay attention. And I'd also recommend this book really quickly. It's put out by Iowa State. You can go to biodieselbasics.com. It's kind of expensive, but whether it's process engineering, compliance, any sort of issue having to do with biodiesel, this is my Bible, and I recommend it very heavily.
There you go.
Is it still good and current and relevant?
They keep it current.
Yeah.
They keep it. They update it
I
all
bought
the
that
time.
about a year ago and it's been in my partner's trunk.
What?
I bought that about a year ago and it's been in my partner's trunk ever since. And
You order one today, it'll have a different copyright on it. It's worth it. Rudy Prusco is the guy that edits it and publishes it. If you've heard names like John Van Gerpen, my hero. I can't ever pronounce the chemist's name. I can't pronounce that to save my life. He's my hero. A lot of the heroes, several of us in biodiesel, wrote that book and keep it current. Does he? I don't think Rudy. Yes?
Just kind of a process question. This probably isn't even a quality question, but you were saying that like some people don't get their temperature right. It was my understanding that if you process biodiesel, temperature helps speed the reaction, right? So if you were to process, say, at 125 degrees, it would just take longer to work. Instead of 2 hours, maybe 4 hours. Because my only, even longer than that, my only bad batch that I've ever had was because my water heater wouldn't get it up to 136. I wasn't sure what the problem was. I got 125 and I thought, all right, fine, I'll go with it. And I ran it for 4, maybe 5 hours instead of 2. It seemed like it worked, but when I finally washed, it was a mess. I went into the dry tank and immediately plugged my filter. Total catastrophe. But I didn't understand why, because I thought if I processed longer, it would be all right. It would still come
I think it might have been a fluke, because 5 hours was plenty of time.
Yeah. Were you able to?
It might have been something else there.
Yeah, were you able to, and again, I'm going to come back, and I sound like a broken record, but did you keep a sample of the oil that you made it with, and did you test it for water?
It was a weird batch of oil that was supposedly canola, but even at room temperature, I couldn't really get it to be liquid.
Okay.
And, wow. Yeah, and
that doesn't sound like canola.
Well, that's what I thought, but they insisted at the kitchen that that's what it was.
Was there also grease scraps in it?
I ran it in the source, because after that mess up, I'm messing with these people again. You know?
I think canola,
yeah. Oh, hydrogenated, yeah.
That wasn't so much the temperature, it was the oil.
I talked to the restaurants and they said, oh, we use canola. Sure, but if you actually look at it, it's canola, you know, sludge.
Something else.
Yeah.
That's canola on there, though.
Yeah, well, it's just got a higher gel point, but it is tougher to deal with.
This was a mess. And it was in the middle of the winter, it took me almost 3 hours.
Yeah, that would do it. So, we're done here. I just wanted to thank you for coming. If you have questions about quality, you've got my address and my website's here. I'm always willing to help. Steve is more than happy to help. He's got cards you can give out if you'd like. Use us. Our goal is to help you make good fuel.
I just want to make an announcement real quick too. Please make the orange cap bottles. They're for you guys to use. Take a couple of them. Do your 1 liter batches in them. They're graduated and they're safer than Coke bottle. They're not going to break out.
Really nice.
The orange cap 1 liter bottles.
I've got enough one for 27. You want to try it?